Attraction research consistently identifies specific psychological factors that predict long-term relationship satisfaction more reliably than physical appearance or technique. And most men have simply never encountered this research directly because it rarely shows up in the cultural conversation men actually have access to. Today, we're reviewing 3 factors that studies genuinely link to building and sustaining attraction over time, why each one matters considerably more than most men assume, and what the evidence actually says about applying them in a real long-term relationship rather than a single encounter. Research on long-term relationship attraction draws an important distinction between initial attraction, which tends to be driven heavily by physical and situational factors, first impressions, timing, circumstance, and sustained attraction, which research consistently links instead to specific, repeated behavioral patterns that either build or erode connection gradually over months and years. This distinction genuinely matters because so much of the cultural messaging men absorb throughout their lives focuses almost entirely on the former appearance, first date performance, physical chemistry, while the growing body of relationship research consistently finds that the latter ongoing behavior predicts whether a relationship remains genuinely satisfying and attractive to both partners 5, 10, or 20 years down the line. Understanding this distinction reframes the entire question most men start with when thinking about attraction. It stops being a fixed quality you either have or don't have, and becomes something considerably more actionable. A pattern of behavior that can be understood, practiced, and genuinely strengthened over time, regardless of how any particular relationship began. Before continuing, a brief but important note that applies throughout this entire video. Everything discussed here reflects population-level research patterns identified across large groups of couples studied over time, not a guaranteed formula that applies identically to every individual relationship. Every couple carries its own unique dynamics, history, and communication style, and these findings function best as a general evidence-informed framework to draw from, not a rigid checklist to apply mechanically without regard for your own specific relationship. The first factor research consistently identifies is sustained, genuine attention, something relationship researchers frequently refer to as partner responsiveness. Studies tracking couples across multiple years, sometimes decades, consistently find that partners who feel genuinely noticed and prioritized during the ordinary, unremarkable moments of daily life, not through grand, occasional gestures, but through small, consistent attentiveness woven into everyday interaction, report meaningfully higher sustained attraction compared to couples where that attention has gradually become inconsistent, distracted, or reserved only for special occasions. This connects to a considerably broader body of attachment research, which finds that feeling consistently and reliably noticed by a partner activates a genuine sense of psychological security, and that security, somewhat counterintuitively to how many people think about romantic attraction, is precisely what allows sustained attraction to develop and deepen over time, distinct from the more novelty-driven attraction that tends to dominate the earliest stages of a relationship. Distraction, chronic busyness, or simply allowing attention to become inconsistent over years measurably erodes this foundation, according to the research, regardless of how strong the initial attraction happened to be when the relationship began. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it directly contradicts a common, largely unspoken assumption many men carry, that strong initial chemistry is somehow self-sustaining on its own, requiring little ongoing maintenance. The research consistently suggests the opposite. Initial attraction opens a door. Consistent, genuine attention is what keeps a partner walking through it, year after year, long after the novelty of a new relationship has naturally faded. The second factor, somewhat counterintuitive to a lot of conventional relationship advice, involves maintaining individual interests, goals, and a genuine sense of identity within a long-term relationship, rather than allowing that identity to become entirely merged with or dependent on the relationship itself. Research examining long-term attraction consistently finds that partners who maintain some degree of independent pursuits, whether that's friendships outside the relationship, hobbies, professional growth, or simply time spent developing personal interests, report meaningfully higher sustained attraction from their partner compared to couples where one or both partners' sense of identity gradually became fully absorbed into the relationship over time. The proposed explanation for this pattern involves a combination of ongoing novelty and genuine mutual respect. A partner who continues actively growing, learning, and maintaining their own distinct life provides a source of ongoing, authentic interest to their partner rather than becoming an entirely predictable, static presence over years. At the same time, this pattern models a kind of self-respect and personal groundedness that research consistently links to sustained attractiveness within a relationship, distinct from any specific physical quality. This isn't an argument for prioritizing independence over the relationship itself, and the research doesn't suggest that. It's a genuinely important evidence-supported nuance worth understanding clearly, that healthy, sustained attraction within a long-term partnership tends to depend on both genuine closeness and a degree of maintained individuality existing together, rather than closeness requiring the gradual dissolution of one partner's separate identity into the relationship as a whole. We're now roughly halfway through this video, and this represents a meaningful shift in what we're discussing. Everything covered up to this point examines two specific, individually distinct behavioral patterns, research links to sustained attraction. What follows moves toward understanding the underlying psychological mechanism that actually connects both of these factors together, explaining why they consistently work in tandem rather than functioning as two separate, unrelated pieces of advice. Attachment research suggests that sustained attraction genuinely depends on partners simultaneously feeling both secure through the consistent, genuine attention discussed as the first factor, and free through respected individual autonomy, the second factor already discussed. These two needs aren't contradictory, despite sometimes appearing that way on the surface. Research consistently finds that couples who successfully balance both genuine, consistent closeness alongside genuine, respected independence report the highest levels of long-term relationship satisfaction and sustained attraction, considerably higher than couples who lean too heavily toward either extreme in isolation, whether that's excessive dependence and enmeshment on one end, or excessive emotional distance and disconnection on the other. This helps explain something a great many people have experienced without necessarily having accurate language to describe it clearly. A relationship can feel genuinely close and secure while simultaneously feeling stifling or predictable if individual identity has been allowed to dissolve entirely into the partnership. Equally, a relationship can feel exciting and independent while simultaneously feeling insecure or disconnected if genuine, consistent attention has been allowed to lapse. Sustained attraction, according to this research, lies specifically in the space where both needs are being met together, not in the pursuit of either one at the expense of the other. The third factor research identifies is direct, honest communication about needs and appreciation, rather than relying on assumption or the hope that a partner will simply infer what matters without ever being told explicitly. Research examining long-term couples consistently finds that partners who explicitly, regularly express genuine appreciation and who directly communicate their own needs, rather than expecting a partner to guess accurately over time, report meaningfully higher sustained attraction than couples who default to assumption as their primary mode of understanding each other's inner experience. This connects to a considerably broader pattern identified across relationship research more generally. Unspoken expectation creates a gap, often a genuinely significant one, between what's actually happening within a relationship and what each partner separately assumes is happening, and this gap tends to widen gradually over years of accumulated silence rather than narrowing on its own without deliberate, ongoing communication actively working to close it. Men who assume a long-term partner simply knows they're appreciated without ever actually saying so directly and specifically are frequently operating on a mistaken assumption the research doesn't support. Explicit, direct expression said clearly rather than implied appears to matter considerably more for sustained attraction than most men initially expect, precisely because it removes the ambiguity that silence and assumption tend to leave behind. Before continuing, if you want a broader framework for men's health after 40, including how physical vitality and hormonal health connect meaningfully to relationships, Dr. Emily Carter's guide, The Iron Age, the complete blueprint to reclaiming testosterone strength and vitality after 40, covers testosterone, strength, energy, and vitality across 9 focused chapters within a concise 14-page format. It's priced at $49.99, with the link provided directly with this video. It's educational in nature, not a replacement for professional relationship or medical counseling, but it offers a genuinely clear, practical framework for connecting these interrelated areas of health. Research examining couples decades into a relationship consistently finds that these 3 factors don't diminish in importance over time. They compound. Consistent attention becomes considerably more meaningful when set against the backdrop of a genuinely shared history spanning years or decades together. Maintained individual identity helps prevent the sense of flattening or predictability that some long-term relationships gradually experience without either partner fully recognizing why. And direct, ongoing communication actively prevents accumulated unspoken assumption from becoming entrenched and difficult to unwind after years of silence around a particular topic. Couples who successfully build these 3 patterns early in a relationship tend to maintain and even strengthen them over subsequent decades, while couples who never establish this pattern often find these same gaps become considerably. Most cultural messaging aimed at men regarding attraction emphasizes initial, largely physical factors almost exclusively, since that represents the more visible, easily discussed, and easily marketed piece of this considerably broader topic. The psychological and relational research discussed throughout this entire video rarely reaches mainstream conversation in any meaningful way, leaving most men without accurate, evidence-based information about what genuinely sustains attraction across years, as opposed to what generates initial interest across a single encounter or a few early dates. This represents a genuine, significant information gap. One, this video is specifically intended to help close. It's worth addressing directly how these three factors hold up during genuinely demanding life phases: career pressure, raising children, caregiving for aging parents, since these are precisely the periods research finds most couples struggle to maintain consistent attention, individual identity, and open communication simultaneously. Studies on couples navigating high-stress life transitions consistently find that attraction doesn't erode because partners stop caring. It erodes because consistent attention is the first thing to get sacrificed when time and energy become scarce, followed closely by individual pursuits, and finally by the kind of unhurried, direct communication. These three factors depend on. This matters because it reframes a common misunderstanding. A partner feeling less prioritized during a demanding season isn't necessarily evidence that attraction itself has faded. Research suggests it's often simply evidence that the behavioral patterns sustaining attraction have been temporarily crowded out by genuine external demands. Recognizing this distinction and communicating it directly rather than allowing a partner to draw their own, sometimes inaccurate conclusions appears in research to meaningfully protect a relationship during exactly the periods most likely to strain it. Research on relationship maintenance during high-demand life phases points towards small, low-effort adjustments rather than dramatic gestures as the most sustainable approach. Brief, undistracted check-ins, even 5 or 10 minutes daily, tend to preserve the sense of consistent attention discussed earlier, considerably more effectively than infrequent but longer conversations. Protecting even modest, consistent time for individual pursuits, rather than eliminating them entirely during busy periods, helps preserve the identity-related factor discussed earlier. And briefly naming the pressure directly, acknowledging to a partner that a demanding period is affecting available attention, tends to prevent the kind of unspoken assumption that otherwise fills the silence during exactly these stretches. One final point worth emphasizing. While much of this research draws from long-term couples, the underlying mechanisms, security through consistent attention, respect through maintained autonomy, clarity through direct communication, apply meaningfully at any stage of a relationship, not only after decades together. Couples earlier in a relationship who build these patterns intentionally from the outset tend to enter the longer-term phase of their relationship with a considerably stronger foundation than couples who only begin addressing these factors after noticing attraction has already faded. This is precisely why understanding this research earlier, rather than later, carries genuine practical value regardless of where a relationship currently stands. A pattern worth addressing directly involves how men sometimes misapply the first factor, consistent attention, once they become aware of it, rather than integrating small, genuine attentiveness into ordinary daily interaction. Some men swing toward the opposite extreme, sudden, intense, performative attention that feels disconnected from their normal behavior. Research on relationship perception suggests partners frequently notice this shift and interpret it as inauthentic or strategic, particularly if it appears suddenly rather than gradually, which can paradoxically reduce trust rather than build the security this factor is meant to create. The research-supported approach involves modest, sustainable adjustments woven into existing routines rather than a dramatic overhaul. Noticing and briefly acknowledging something a partner mentioned earlier in the day, asking a genuine follow-up question about something they're navigating, or simply being present without a phone during a shared meal represent the kind of small, consistent behaviors. The research actually points toward considerably more than it's worth acknowledging that individuals vary considerably in communication style. And the third factor, direct communication, doesn't require identical expression from every person. Research on communication patterns within relationships recognizes that some partners naturally communicate more verbally and explicitly, while others express appreciation and needs through action-oriented behavior, still communicating clearly, but through a different channel. What research consistently finds problematic isn't a particular style itself, but a mismatch left unaddressed, where one partner assumes their preferred communication style is being received clearly when it isn't, without either partner ever directly clarifying the gap. This suggests a practical refinement worth understanding. The goal isn't necessarily adopting a single correct communication style, but rather explicitly discussing with a partner how each of you naturally expresses appreciation and needs, so that a partner whose primary language is action-based, for instance, doesn't misinterpret an absence of frequent verbal affirmation as an absence of genuine feeling, when the actual explanation is simply a difference in expressive style rather than diminished attraction or care. For relationships where one or more of these three factors has genuinely eroded over time, Research on relationship repair offers some useful evidence-based guidance worth understanding. Studies on rebuilding consistent attention after a period of neglect find that gradual, sustained reintroduction tends to work considerably better than an abrupt, dramatic shift, partly because sudden change can appear suspicious or unsustainable to a partner who has adjusted their expectations downward over time. Similarly, research on reintroducing individual identity after a period of enmeshment suggests this works best when framed collaboratively, discussed openly with a partner rather than pursued unilaterally, since unexplained new independence can otherwise be misread as emotional withdrawal rather than healthy individuation. Rebuilding direct communication after a long period of relying on assumption generally benefits from starting with lower stakes topics before addressing more significant unspoken expectations, allowing both partners to rebuild comfort and trust with direct expression gradually, rather than attempting an immediate, comprehensive conversation covering years of accumulated assumption all at once, which research suggests can feel overwhelming rather than productive for either partner. It's worth briefly acknowledging that cultural and family background meaningfully shapes how comfortable individuals feel with each of these three factors, particularly direct communication about needs and appreciation, which some cultural contexts explicitly discourage in favor of more indirect, implicit expression. Research doesn't suggest one cultural approach is inherently superior, but it does consistently find that couples navigating differing cultural expectations around communication benefit from openly discussing these differences directly, rather than assuming a shared unspoken understanding exists where genuine differences in upbringing and expectation are actually present. For context, much of the research informing this video draws from long-term longitudinal studies tracking couples over extended periods, alongside broader survey research examining relationship satisfaction across large populations. This methodology allows researchers to identify patterns that predict outcomes over time, rather than simply capturing a single snapshot of a relationship at one particular moment, which is precisely why these findings carry more weight than anecdotal relationship advice circulating more broadly, since they reflect patterns observed and measured across many relationships studied consistently over meaningful periods of time. So here's the bottom line to take away from everything discussed throughout this video. Research consistently identifies consistent attention, maintained individual identity, and direct, honest communication as the three factors that genuinely build and sustain attraction over time, considerably more reliably than physical technique or occasional grand romantic gestures ever could on their own. Three practical takeaways worth carrying forward. Prioritize small, consistent attentiveness woven into ordinary daily interaction over occasional, isolated grand gestures. Maintain your own genuine interests, growth, and identity rather than allowing it to become entirely absorbed into the relationship itself. And communicate appreciation and needs directly and explicitly rather than assuming your partner already understands them without ever being told clearly. If any of this resonated with your own experience, that's genuinely worth discussing directly and openly with your partner. The Iron Age Guide is linked with this video if you're looking for that broader framework. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.